Hello and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into the world of James Bond, the films, the cars, the gadgets, the cast, and a few fascinating facts about the legendary Eon production series. Bond isn't just a spy, he's a British institution, a symbol of style, wit, and adventure. Now, it's impossible to cover everything in one video. The franchise is just too vast. But what I'll do is take you through some of the most iconic characters, the unforgettable cars, ingenious gadgets, and I'll sprinkle in some trivia along the way. So buckle up, grab your martini, shaken not stirred, and let's begin with where it all started. Released in 1962, Dr. No was Eon Productions' first Bond film. And following the release of the film, Broccoli and Saltzman formed the holding company Danjak to ensure the future of the James Bond film series. It introduced audiences to James Bond, a suave British secret agent brought to life by Sean Connery. Connery's Bond was cool, confident, and dangerous, the perfect mix that set the tone for everything that followed. And we also met the very first Bond girl, Honey Rider, who was portrayed by Ursula Andress, and her unforgettable entrance from the sea in that white bikini became one of the most iconic images in cinema history. Jack Lord also co-starred as CIA agent Felix Leiter. And if you were around in the 70s, you'll remember Jack Lord as Steve McGarrett in Hawaii Five-O. The show named Five-O because, of course, Hawaii was the 50th state of America. In this film, Bond makes his way to Jamaica and is seen behind the wheel of a Sunbeam Alpine. But it would be the Aston Martins that Bond would be later associated with and would define the franchise. In Dr. No, we meet not only Bond himself, but also the formula that would define the series. The exotic locations, a menacing villain, his glamorous allies, and of course, unforgettable style. The film was made on a relatively modest budget, just $1.1 million, yet it grossed nearly $59.5 million worldwide, and it became a global hit, and it launched one of the longest running film franchises in history. From this starting point, Bond quickly grew into more than just a character. He became a cultural phenomenon, with each film adding new layers of action, intrigue, and spectacle. From Connery's classic portrayal to Daniel Craig's gritty realism, every actor brought something unique to the role. And it wasn't just Bond. Villains like Goldfinger and Blofeld and allies like M and Q became unforgettable parts of the saga. The early casting process for Dr. No was far less straightforward than people often assume. The producers wanted Cary Grant for the role of Bond, but he'd only commit to one film and they wanted someone who could be part of a series. So this ruled him out. Other actors considered were Richard Johnson, Patrick McGoohan of Danger Man fame, David Niven, and Rod Taylor, before finally handing the role to a 31-year-old Sean Connery. Incidentally, Patrick McGoohan had worked previously with Sean in the 1957 film Hell Drivers, and it's said that Patrick turned down the role of Bond because he objected to Bond's womanizing and violence. Although Dr. No became the first Bond film, it wasn't originally intended to be the case. The initial choice was Thunderball, but due to a legal dispute, they opted for Dr. No. And in the end, the choice seemed quite apt, with claims that American rocket testing at Cape Canaveral had problems with rockets going astray. And that famous line, "The name's Bond, James Bond," was almost cut from Dr. No. You can't imagine the franchise without it, and it's these little details that help shape the legend that we know today. James Bond will return in From Russia with Love. "1963 saw the release of the second Bond film, From Russia with Love. President John F. Kennedy had named Fleming's novel among his 10 favourite books of all time in Life magazine. Producers Broccoli and Saltzman chose this as the follow-up to Bond's debut, Dr. No. The theme song was composed by Lionel Bart of Oliver fame, and it was sung by Matt Monro, a former London bus driver. It was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for the Best Original Song. Following the success of Dr. No, United Artists doubled the budget for the sequel. They also approved a $100,000 bonus for Sean Connery on top of his $54,000 salary. The stakes were higher, the expectations enormous, and the pressure intense. In this film, Bond's sent to Istanbul to assist in the defection of Soviet consulate clerk Tatiana Romanova, played by Daniela Bianchi. But Spectre had its own agenda to avenge Bond's killing of Dr. No. The behind the scenes story is almost as dramatic as the film itself. The production was chaotic, ambitious, occasionally dangerous, and yet it shaped the entire DNA of the Bond franchise. Filming began on the 1st of April 1963 at Pinewood Studios, before the crew embarked on an ambitious international shoot across Turkey, Scotland, Switzerland, and Venice. But almost immediately the production was beset by problems. The climactic helicopter and boat chase scene, sequence not found in Fleming's original novel, was added to the film to give a grand cinematic finale. It was inspired partly by the crop dusting scene in Hitchcock's North by Northwest, and these scenes proved far more dangerous than expected. In Istanbul, rough seas made it difficult for the speedboats to go fast enough, and a rented boat filled with cameras ended up sinking in the Bosphorus. Meanwhile, the crew was struggling to secure a helicopter, and at one point, special effects technicians were nearly arrested at a local airbase. The helicopter shots that made it into the film were achieved using a radio controlled miniature. With Istanbul proving unworkable, an alternative location needed to be found, and consequently, the new backdrop was moved to Loch Crinan on the west coast of Scotland. Behind schedule and over budget, the crew struggled to complete production in time for the already announced premiere that October. A further setback occurred on the 6th of July 1963. While scouting locations in Argyll for that day's filming of the climactic boat chase, Terence Young's helicopter crashed into the water, along with art director Michael White and the cameraman. Fortunately, all escaped with minor injuries, and despite the calamity, Young was behind the camera for the full day's work. A few days later, Bianchi's driver fell asleep during the commute to a 6 a.m. shoot, and he crashed the car. The actress's face was bruised, and Bianchi's scenes had to be delayed for 2 weeks while the facial contusions healed. The speedboat used by Bond in the final chase may look like an ordinary cabin cruiser, but in fact it's a bit of a legend itself. It's a 23-foot Fairy Huntress, which was a respected British offshore powerboat, and it was a genuine competitor in powerboat racing between 1960 and 1974. The boat used in the film was hull number 32, and it was powered by an Interceptor V8 petrol engine. The baddies pursued Bond in a mix of Huntsman 28 and Huntress 23 boats. In total, Fairy supplied 5 boats for filming, and as well as being handsomely rewarded for the hire, it also proved to be a brilliant piece of PR for them as well. It took 7 weeks to organise and shoot a sequence lasting just 5 minutes. And what I find interesting is that on this boat you'll see the Fairy logo on the bow. But in the film, none of the boats used had the logo adorning them. The sounds of the boat chase were replaced in post-production, since the boats weren't regarded as being loud enough. And the explosion shot in Pinewood got out of control, burning Walter Gottle's eyelids and seriously injuring 3 stuntmen. Daniela Bianchi was a former Miss Universe first runner-up in 1960, and this had brought her to the attention of the film company. She seemed ideally suited for the role of Tatiana Romanova. The only problem was her Italian accent was so heavy they had to have her voice dubbed by an uncredited Barbara Jefford. Barbara went on to provide additional voice work in later Bond films. From Russia with Love premiered in London on the 10th of October 1963. The timing was uncanny. Britain was consumed by the Profumo scandal, and Prime Minister Harold Macmillan resigned just 8 days later. The film's Cold War intrigue resonated deeply with audiences living through real world political upheaval. The film was a commercial success, with its $2 million budget taking in more than $78 million in box office receipts, and it was the first Bond film to win a BAFTA for cinematography. This film introduced several essential elements that will be used in subsequent Bond films. A pre-title sequence, a shadowy Blofeld who would only be referred to in the film as Number One. And although Blofeld is mentioned in the end credits, the name of the actor is just shown as a question mark. There would be Q branch gadgets. There'd be a secret weapon or a gadget for Bond. And in this film, it was a briefcase which, if opened incorrectly, had a tear gas bomb that detonated. Bond was also supplied with a folding AR-7 sniper rifle along with 20 rounds of ammunition, and a throwing knife and 50 gold sovereigns. There'd be a helicopter sequence, which was repeated in every subsequent Bond film, except The Man with the Golden Gun. There'd be a postscript action scene after the main climax, a theme song with lyrics, and the promise that James Bond will return in the credits. These weren't just stylistic choices, they became the blueprint for the next 6 decades of Bond cinema. In the United States, the film gained an unexpected historical footnote. It was the last movie President Kennedy watched at the White House on the 20th November 1963 before going to Dallas. Just 2 days later, he would be assassinated.